Bad news when it comes to the Ebola drug supply. A wannabe beauty queen has been arrested in insurance fraud, and it's Flashback Friday. All these stories and more coming up on The Rundown.
All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Ready, camera, to record. 3, 2, 1.
Record.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is The Rundown, where we run down some of the big stories making headlines. I'm your host, John Phillips. Michelle Fields is out today, so I'm joined here in studio by the one and only Tammy Bruce. By the way, you can read her at WashingtonTimes.com every single Monday, not Fridays, but Mondays. Before we get to our top stories, we want to discuss what's happening right now in Ferguson, Missouri. That's where violence has erupted after the shooting of an African-American teen by police. And Tammy, this is a story where I want to be very careful what I say because there's still a lot more that we don't know than what we do know. We need to make sure that we get our facts right before we jump to conclusions. But I do know this, what we're seeing in the streets by this mob, and I'm going to call them a mob because that's what they are, is entirely unacceptable. And I'm of the belief that you can't overreact enough to a mob. When you see something like this, you got to put them down.
I agree, but there's two different groups here. You've got the regular protesters who even during the day will even have like a parade or like working for support to get more information. We aren't clear. I mean, through all of this that's going on, we're not clear exactly why that original shooting took place. There are conflicting reports about what happened. And yet we then are dealing with what was effectively a riot, a wide-scale robbery and looting that evening, cars being driven into stores to break into them. It was classic. For those of us who have lived in a city where there's a riot, we know what that is, and it's frightening.
It's frightening. It's like what the left says about hate crimes, how it terrorizes an entire community. Yeah. Riots terrorize an entire state.
Yeah, and they actually do. I mean, they literally terrorize everyone in the, and these are businesses that are owned by the locals. They're businesses that are owned by African Americans. So look, these are opportunists versus, and rioters versus actual protesters. So the moment you light a Molotov cocktail, which is also what's been going on, you are no longer a protester, right? There's also concern about people coming into the community from outside. My concern is here, and there are many different fronts, is that this has been a concern ever since battlefield equipment has been moving to local police departments. And they've noticed it's kind of a militarization of that police department, but it's happened around the country. And the initial discussion of starting in 2009 and 10 really was, what will all this military equipment do to the local police department? Will it make their attitude change?
And we'll see. I know that was, of course, one of the criticisms of what was going on at the Bundy Ranch in Nevada. I personally don't have as much of a problem with it as many do, provided they're not overstepping their bounds. And in this particular case, again, as we've both mentioned, we still don't know the facts. And when you know the facts, and forensic science will tell you what happened. I mean,
but even beyond the fact, Johnny, we now have reporters who've been arrested. They've been known to be reporters. They were not participating in the violence. And I do want all of the bad guys dealt with the police. But when you're sending tear gas to an obvious camera crew and reporter, and then there's footage of them dismantling the equipment of the reporter crew, that tells you something else is going on. That if you need all these men and women to deal with riots, why are you taking out important personnel to deal with the media? And I think that speaks to this kind of militaristic controlling framework that has nothing to do with the riots.
Well, I mean, I would argue that almost goes into the government secrecy realm more so than the militarization, because look at what the Obama administration is doing with their secrecy. Bob Woodward, who's no conservative icon, says this is the most secretive administration he's ever covered before in Washington, D.C. More secretive than Dick Nixon.
Yeah, and you know, look, that's a very good point, because we've got this attitude that trickles down from the top, right? When you have a federal government that's spying on reporters, that's attacking reporters, you've got the Cheryl Atkinson situation where she is kind of forced out of her job. You know, America and law enforcement is seeing an attitude from the top that says perhaps media is not your friend. And that, of course, is a problem, because media is finally, and this is the other irony, finally media is upset with suddenly a big government framework and the government having too big of a hand, and they're suddenly remembering there's a Constitution. You know, that's a revelation for some people in the media when it comes to the Fourth Amendment, the issue of the First Amendment, because it has not been discussed very much. And I think that that's one of there's a silver lining to this. The media is remembering that there is supposed to be a kind of rule of law in this country.
And we'll, of course, be monitoring this story for you right here on PJTV as the situation develops. All right, now it's time to move on to the top of the rundown, and we begin with Tammy. All
right, well, top of my rundown, something very different here, but certainly very serious. The manufacturer of an Ebola drug, the one Ebola drug we've got, the experimental drug, says the supply has now been depleted. It's out. Remaining supplies of the drug, called ZMapp, were sent to countries in West Africa to help with the crisis there. Obviously completely understandable. More than 1,000 people have died in West Africa of Ebola as of the last week. And the drug was given to the 2 American doctors, or the missionaries, who became infected, one doctor and one nurse, along with a Spanish priest who, by the way, has since died. So Ebola is normally treated by keeping patients hydrated and replacing lost blood and using antibiotics. But as we know, there's a 90% fatality rate. The drug's manufacturer is working with the government to increase production. The drug has not been evaluated for safety in humans, but obviously, if you've got a virus, 90% kill rate that makes you melt from the inside out, I think you're not going to mind being experimented on. And this is, look, it was an experiment. They didn't have many doses to begin with, but we've known about Ebola for a long time. We've also known about the desire for germ warfare for a long time. The fact that we've been caught, the world's been caught with its pants down in this regard, is appalling.
Well, and I know I don't want to turn into a one-note Johnny on this, but I am.
Well, you are Johnny.
This is the problem with having complete open borders, where you have people from all of these countries, from all over the world, who can come in here. You have no control over who they are. You have no control over whether or not they've been vaccinated. They can bring God knows what into this country, into these cities. A lot of them are moving to areas that are very densely populated, where you're living on top of one another, so it's easy to spread these diseases. And as this outbreak is going on, and we're all appalled at this, and we all want to get it under control, and that's understandable. But at the same time, we're leaving the back door open, and we're letting whoever wants to come here that's within walking distance. And I do have to say this, too. I don't know if you read Ann Coulter's column about these Christian missionaries that went over there, but Christian missionaries who are interested in helping improve the health of the world should stay in the United States.
Well,
you shouldn't be going over there and getting Ebola and then coming back.
Well, now look, I read Ann's column. Some things I agree with, some things I don't in general with her. Here's the reality about the greatness of the United States. We have enough Christian people here, enough Christian doctors, enough missionaries here to where we can actually spare some. No other country in the world can say that. So if with that particular doctor who felt called to go and help, it's because he's an American and we live in an environment where we pretty much have what we need when it comes to personnel. And in Africa, they don't. And I think that we can be a little bit more generous. It's not like if this was the one doctor that was a Christian missionary who wanted to help people, and let's say we had 100 in the country, then yes, that column would have been appropriate. In this case, we have to remember who we are. We did not suffer because he left the country. And look, I disagree with their return. I think we should have treated them there. We could have sent an entire team. The return is one thing, but the desire to go was their choice.
If that's your calling and you're willing to roll the dice and you get it, then stay there.
Yeah, bringing them back completely smashed the usual protocol of isolate and treat. There is nothing they could do here that we couldn't do there. They had already gotten the serum, and then it was a matter of waiting. We're already sending scores of doctors there. We could have waited, and I think that as missionaries and as Christians, they probably would have understood that decision.
Well, I mean, this is one thing where I think that people tell you, of course, what you want to hear when they do it. All right, you're going over there to treat them. If you get it, you understand you're not coming back. Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Then they get it, then it's like they're looking on orbits for the first flight back home.
Well, and we also have to realize with everything the government does, there's some politics. I think also the Obama administration, desperate to look like they care, thought this might be an easy way to do it. I now, and it's horrible, I see the politics in every kind of decision that's made by any federal agency. And I'm thinking that might have been one of those things that Obama thought he could do, that would, just like he thought bringing Bo Bergdahl back would be great. There's a disconnect because he's only looking at, and the federal government only looks at their imaginary idea of what's right versus what really is right, and that's what gets them tripped up.
All right. Now it's time to move to the top of my rundown, where a beauty pageant contestant has been arrested for insurance fraud. No, she didn't steal the tiara. Shauna Palmer participated in Miss Toyota Long Beach Grand Prix beauty pageant in April. Video of her taken during the event showed her walking in high heels on stage, including in the bikini contest. There she is right there with the circle around her. This was all going on while she was collecting disability for a foot injury claim. She fractured a toe while working, no, not as a dancer, as a clerk at a grocery store. She said she couldn't place any weight on her foot or wear a shoe for a long period of time. California insurance officials got hold of her social media account, saw the video, and launched an investigation. The wannabe beauty queen was arrested and faces up to 1 year in county jail. And this is something where social media is outing a lot of these people. It's not just white-collar criminals. It's violent criminals, too. I have a friend who works for the LAPD, and he works for the sex crimes division. And he said the first thing they do when they're investigating someone is they look at their Facebook page, they look at their Instagram page, they look at their Twitter page. Because not only do some of them flat out admit to the crime in a status update, many of them will post things and you can place them because it'll show posted in Los Angeles, posted in Anaheim, posted in Palm Springs. And you can see where they are and you can put the map out and locate their whereabouts. These criminals are dumb.
There's another story, not certainly as serious as a sex crime. A woman had shoplifted apparently a lot of clothing out of a store and then had put pictures of herself up on Facebook modeling all the stuff she stole. So we really are finding out that criminals are stupid. And fortunately for social media, they just don't connect the dots. They don't realize that other people than your friend list can see this. But it also speaks to a very troubling framework where, so you have a friend list, and you think your friends are going to be okay with you bragging about your recent crime or with what you took from the store. It seems like there is a recklessness, a kind of a chaos that's ruling now when it comes to what people expect to have happen to them. It's very strange.
And you don't expect your friends are going to rat you out, but they do.
Yeah, or they don't have to as long as your page is public and the police can see it. I'm all good.
True.
I'm good for that.
And in many cases, that's what they do.
Yeah.
All right, now it's time to move on to Flashback Friday. And Tammy, you're up first.
Well, on this Flashback Friday, remembering the life of actress Lauren Bacall. She died Tuesday in New York at the age of 89. Bacall's breakout role was alongside Humphrey Bogart, who would eventually become her husband, of course, in the 1944 film To Have and Have Not. In a sultry, smoky voice, Bacall delivered one of her most famous lines ever. Take a listen.
It's even better when you help. Sure you won't change your mind about this?
Uh-huh.
This belongs to me and so do my lips. I don't see any difference.
Oh, I do.
Okay. You know you don't have to act with me, Steve. You don't have to say anything and you don't have to do anything. Not a thing. Oh, maybe just whistle. You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
Yeah, she was 19 there, I think, and born in the Bronx, a nice Jewish girl. She had another film role set after this, which they then expanded and made into a co-starring role with Bogart. But the difference between, not only is it the end of an era, she was, of course, one of the last, you think of Bette Davis and Katharine Hepburn and Lauren Bacall. The end of an era of people who had faces. You look at the faces of a Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, but also films with just suggestion. In the 40s, that line was so suggestive, people were shocked because our own imaginations can be much more intense and much more graphic than anything they could necessarily show us on film. And that's what's lost. You had to have people with that kind of look, those kinds of deliveries, to be able to send a message and to deal with lines that had suggestive framework that people today wouldn't be able to do because of the depth of the nature of that kind of a performance, in this case from a 19, 20-year-old girl from the Bronx. Just beautiful stuff. She's going to be very missed.
The art of suggestion is so much better than just going right out and doing it.
Yeah. Mystery is what is missing in our culture and in art. And it's a mystery that then requires a woman and a performer to be much more complicated in what she does. So for all of you who are watching this, a clerk at the Whole Foods that I went to was sad about the Robin Williams situation. I said, yes, and and Lauren Bacall. And she says, who's that? If you're not familiar with Lauren Bacall, go to your Netflix or your Apple TV and, watch whatever film it is that she's got there, but particularly to have and have not, and anything from the 40s, and you'll be better off for it.
All right. On this Flashback Friday, a magnitude 8 earthquake devastated Peru in 2007. The massive quake off the central coast of Peru near Lima lasted for 3 agonizing minutes.
Oh, boy.
That's an eternity if you've ever been through an earthquake. Nearly 600 people were killed in the tremor. Thousands were injured. Experts say this kind of quake happens about once every 100 years on the South American plate. The quake resulted in a tsunami along the Peruvian coastline. The effects of the quake are still being felt there today. And if you live in a quake zone, to hear about a magnitude 8 quake really gets your attention.
And when you're in it, as you've noted, for those of us who are Los Angelinos, you're dealing usually with 20 seconds, 30 seconds. The notion of it continuing for 3 minutes is appalling. And it just goes to show you that Mother Earth will kick our butts if she ever just really wants to.
She had lots of indigestion that day.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. What do you think about the beauty pageant contestant arrested for insurance fraud? And what about the passing of Hollywood legend Lauren Bacall? We want to know what you think, so make sure to leave your comments in the comments section below. I'm John Phillips for Tammy Bruce joining me here in Los Angeles. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.